So here you go. I promised this last week. I did the Anaconda timeline, and I kind of left it hanging without covering one of the films. And this week we're going to discover why as we cover the Lake Placid series. Let's jump right into this one and find out if this timeline is about to make some sense or if it's all just a giant croc. Not an alligator, know the difference. Lake Placid hit the theaters back in 1999, and we're on this big, beautiful lake with Mad Eye Moody, and this poor scuba diver gets the full body chomp by something big under the water. We then meet Linda 3.0, and she works with Olivia Benson, who has been sleeping with her boyfriend and boss. But then the President of the United States rolls in to investigate. And Kelly's ex, who was killed by Michael Myers once, sends her to the lake to check out the massive tooth that they found, and she heads up there to meet up with Jack and Hank, and they end up at an old lady's house. But wait a minute, is this lake in St. Olaf or something? Before they can get a searching, Porthos shows up as an eccentric rich guy who likes to swim with crocodiles, and they all set up camp by the lake. As they head out onto the lake, they use this sort of sound thing to draw the croc to it, which leads to a guy with no head. And our first, I guess, kinda look at the big guy. It's pretty quick. Wackiness ensues. CGI bears get CG eaten. Hector has a face-to-face with the big boy. And this right here is a big old practical effect. And it's pretty badass. And he barely manages to escape, leading to a Croc versus Chop scene straight out of Jaws 2. They come to the decision to trap the Croc alive instead of killing it using a cow to lure it in, which doesn't go so well.
I just have this feeling everything's totally safe.
Like, when is that ever a good thing to say, really? I mean, you're hip deep in water that a giant crocodile lives in, so I hope you're being sarcastic. They get attacked, and it's a combo of great practical effects and not so great, but not overly terrible CG, and it eventually gets tranquilized and trapped in a helicopter. But just when it seems everything was safe, much like in Anaconda, there's a second croc, and that one they just shoot and blow up. So you get the whole, this is a rare species that shouldn't be killed and instead be preserved. But then you also get to see one go splat. Everyone wins. Like I truly think the filmmakers were like, we don't want to just kill this thing. We need to make a statement about preserving the life of a unique species that is simply doing what is in its nature. And then the studio was like, we need it to die. And the filmmakers were like, well, what if there were two? And the studio was like, but there hasn't been two the whole movie. There wasn't even the hint that there was two. And then the filmmakers were like, it blows up. And the studio said fine. The end shows that there's a bunch of babies though, and Dolores is feeding them. There's no visible date in here, so I guess real time, 99 works for now. It took 8 years for the sequel treatment, but in 2007, Sci-Fi debuted Lake Placid 2. And this guy tells us that 5 people have disappeared from the area in the past 6 months, and his friend is chomped. And then we have Bo Duke and his son, and he's the sheriff, and they're trying to figure out what's killing people. And there's also his ex, who's a fish and game officer. And they talk about Sadie Bickerman, sister of Dolores from the first film, and it's said that she's moved into her sister's house a few years ago after she went missing. So we're definitely at least a few years after the first film. They talk about the events of the first film, but they say that there was nothing about it in the news, and it's hinted that the town covered it up. And I know I've mentioned this for other movies, but this is another one where a vast majority of the audio is recorded in ADR. And if you don't know what that means, it's when the audio from the actual shoot isn't usable, so they have to have the actors go into the studio and re-record all of their lines and match up their voices. And a lot like a lot of this movie is done that way.
Hey, we made it, didn't we?
Yeah, Mike. You're a regular Ferdinand Magellan.
Betty White is gone, but Frau Blucher has taken her place as Sadie, and she's still feeding the Crocs, and is now fully digital, and way worse. There's still some practical shots though, and they look cool. And then there's this sort of replacement for Oliver Platt's character with a poacher played by Glenn, whose son already knows his ABCs. Their attempts to take it alive lead to a dead deputy, and when melted David Boreanaz smashes some Croc eggs, he gets what appears to be his bathing suit area munched on. This one has a severe case of fast CGI Croc and basically immobile practical one, and Ahmad kills one. And about Ahmad, take a look at these scars that he has. What even is this? Of course there's another big guy though, and he gets his revenge, and this girl says there was a Croc in the area several years ago, and Sadie says there's 3 in total. So James blows up number 2 with a rocket launcher. And then I'd like to nominate these 2 for dumbest kids that I've seen recently. They know that there's 1 Croc left and it's still on the loose, and they're safe in a house. And Sadie asks them to go see something down by the lake, and they're all like, oh yeah, sure, seems like a good place to be. Well, the old lady gets eaten, revealing that there's actually 4, so there's 2 left, and Emma stabs and kills one, leaving 1 to go. Struthers gets gnawed, and they finally baboom the final one. Then they leave with the remaining Croc eggs to study, and again, no date, but they say a few years have passed. And I see no reason not to go with just real time, so 07 it is. 3 years later, in 2010, we continue on with Lake Placid 3, again debuting on the Sci-Fi Network. And it starts with a young couple being eaten by a group of smaller Crocs, and we're on the same lake, with Eureka Guy being here, moving into Sadie and Dolores' house. And then Daryl Revick is the new sheriff, and he says that it's been a year since Sadie died, so we're a year after the last movie, so I guess 09. Nathan is Sadie's nephew, and no one mentions Dolores, which is weird. Like both of his aunts died here, but he only mentions growing up there with Sadie. And that's weird, especially since the last film made it sound like it's always been Dolores' house, and that Sadie only moved there after she died. Little Connor there finds out that the Crocs are there and starts feeding them, and then it jumps 2 years later, and we're now 3 years after part 2. So I guess, 2010. But then there's something weird. This Cosmo cover dated August 2006. First, let's talk about that date. If that's current, this is 06, which makes part 2 03, which is fine because it says it's a few years after part 1, which would be 4 years, and that's fine. But this is a fake magazine cover, clearly. The logo is different, and I really don't think that Cosmo would have an article about how to put a bitch in her place. And then here's another little movie thing for you. In every movie that takes place in a grocery store, there's usually an extra who is just really intently staring at a food item. The Witchblade is here too, and the big guys start attacking, but they're not super big yet and are just slightly bigger than a standard Croc, and the cast starts to get whittled down. Then there's a fight with a bigger one at the house where its ability to attack people drastically lessens since it's the main cast. And they have a final showdown in the store where Reba is killed but takes one of them with her, and they blow the second one up. And they say that they've checked the lake and there's no more Crocs, but of course, there is. After 2 more years, we continued on with 2014's Lake Placid, the final chapter, or Lake Placid 4, and it starts with revealing that Reba actually survived the ending of the last film and picks up right afterwards. And the Croc is still alive, but she kills it. Then, it's some time later, and Kate Lockley is here, and are looking for more Crocs on the lake with Reba, so it's some time later, and it's like racing the truck? But they have the area gated off, I guess, because of the Crocs, which makes that whole "we checked and they're extinct" thing at the ending of the last one a bit silly. Willie from V shows up because that's what most people know Robert Englund from, right? And the town wants them to eliminate all the Crocs, and there's rumors that one of them is 40 feet long now. And then some poachers go in to get some of the Croc eggs, and I wonder whatever happened to the one from the ending of the first movie. Where did they take it? Is that Croc still alive? Okay, so the poachers accidentally leave the gate open, and a bus full of swim team kids accidentally go through it because the driver was looking at boobies, which is a really complicated series of events to go through to get people there. And they camp out, and one of them tells the story of Mrs. Bickerman and says that she and her husband fed the local Crocs and recaps everything, saying she died and so did her sister, referencing both Dolores and Sadie. And soon enough, they're being picked off by big ones and a whole swarm of new babies. Turns out in order to survive, they've been feeding on each other, and they go in to save the teens, and Jim is still alive, and oh, his name is Jimmy Bickerman, so I'm assuming that he's somehow related to Sadie and Dolores. And they go back to the old house, which is weird because it's all run down now, so I guess Nathan and family took off right after the last one and never came back, but they don't mention him at all and act like no one has been there since Sadie. The fact that it's all run down and cobwebbed seems like it's definitely a while since the last one, and it's then revealed that Jimmy is Dolores' son, and they're attacked by the biggest Croco and trick him into running into the electrical fence where it dies. The next day, Jimmy is attacked by another big one, and they don't quite say how long it is in between this one and the last, but we know that it was long enough for the Bickerman place to get run down, so I think the real time 2 years is fine, and this is 2012. But then the ending shows us that the one big one remains and is still at large, so much for the final chapter, I guess. And yep, that only lasted 3 years because in 2015, the thing I promised a week ago happened, and we saw the crossover flick Lake Placid versus Anaconda, the fight that every person on Earth was asking for. Immediately we find out that Jimmy is still alive, but has an eye patch now, and he's helping this group collect a giant croc. And they already have one of the Annas, and they're trying to utilize the two creatures to figure out the blood orchid serum. To the surprise of literally no one, the Croc busts loose and frees the snake, and there's a new fish and wildlife officer at a nearby lake, the one mentioned in the last film that the swim team was supposed to go to, and he can't lose. And Reba is back, and she's the sheriff now, so yeah, an interesting career path considering in the first film that she was in, she was like a poacher, and then there's a missing poster for a girl who was likely eaten, and it said that she's been missing since July of 2014. So that's likely when this was set. So maybe like 2 years after the last film. And Wexel, the company from the Anaconda films, is here. And they want to find the snake before it gives birth to what they actually call Crocacondas. There's a group of sorority girls by the lake, and this is like 40 minutes into the movie, and there's been zero snake versus croc action, and the Anaconda has barely been in it. And it kind of seems like the last movie, again, verbatim. A bunch of the girls get eaten, mostly by crocodiles, and still no sign of snakes, but it finally appears just before the 1 hour mark of the movie hits and kills one, and the Wexel crew shows up to try to find their experiment, knocking Jimmy into the water, where he's attacked again, and it's revealed that Sarah here is Murdoch's daughter from that film series, and the female Anaconda finally shows up and fights and eats Beach, who blows it up from the inside. It's revealed that Jimmy survived again, and there's one last croc that they shoot, but there's eggs with those promised Crocacondas. It didn't end there though, because in 2018 we continued on with Lake Placid Legacy, dumping the earlier numbering of the series. We start in Seattle with a group of animal activists, and they get challenged to go to this island in the middle of a lake that there may have been a research lab on that had some sort of accident. They say that happened 25 years ago, and they head on over where they discover the remains of their friend's camp, and, well, they're friends. Soon after, their boat is destroyed, stranding them on the island, and one is bechomped, so they decide to head for the facility. There, they're met with a sort of labyrinth of hallways, and they're chased, revealing what else? A giant crocodile chasing them that they say is 50 feet long. And soon, they realize that the lab was doing tests on the crocs, and that's how this one was going to be the size that it was. And a couple others get eaten, and they're really not improving that croc CG, are they? They discover the guy who dared them alive there, and also, hold up! Joey Pants? Teddy's in this? Anyway, Henderson here was part of the original study and helped create the crocs, and some of them were the crocs from the original film. So they're saying that that was 25 years ago. So either this is 2024, or they're saying that one was 1993. It could also be possible that it was only 19 years ago and the 25-year thing rattled off earlier was in error. More get eaten, and they do a whole deep blue sea water thing, and it does the old school stock dinosaur roar. And Pants gets de-legged, and eventually it's only Jade and Alice left, and they attack it with an excavator and then set it on fire. And hot damn, is that the same roar as the shark from Jaws 4 with some effects on it? The girls are stuck swimming back to the mainland, but of course, there's a second croc. So there you have it. What is that, 6 movies? 6, I guess so. Not a ton of continuity in there. I mean, there is some vague bits of continuity, what with the whole Bickerman family that just seems to keep on growing and growing and growing. But for the most part, there's not a ton of continuity. And yeah, there's always just more crocs. And just when they think they've gotten rid of all the crocs, there's more crocs. Yeah. And for the most part, these are not that great. I do enjoy the first one. Decent flick. It's not a great movie, but it is fun. Giant monster action. It's decent. And some of the other ones have some moments, but for the most part, they're pretty standard sci-fi giant crocodile movies, and there's a million of those. But then these are really not that much different. And the last one, which I thought was going to be sort of like a revitalization of it, is not great either. So yeah, not a huge fan of these, but they're not terrible. Let me know what you thought of this series down below in the comments. I want to hear which ones you liked, which ones you didn't like. Did you just like the first one and none of the other ones like me? You tell me and let me know. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, hit subscribe to the channel as well too, please. And if you think about it, go to my Patreon page at patreon.com/movieTimelines. You can help support this channel, or you can also just keep on watching the videos. I appreciate that as well. And I'll see you very, very shortly for another great one. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.